Welcome back, everyone. Manuel Bravo coming at us again. Well, I'm Shields coming at you again, and this is Manuel Bravo coming at us again. This is St. Peter's Basilica Explained. We're looking at St. Peter's Basilica Square, which we already really talked about. We have one of the main obelisks that found this region, and this beautiful building, which is also home of the papacy, home of the Pope. Vatican City is where we're technically located, which is inside of Rome, which is inside of Italy. Let's jump right in, shall we?
By the standards of the Roman Church, St. Peter's Basilica is relatively new, being only 500 years old. A young home for a religion founded 2 millennia ago. But this is not the first church to occupy this site.
No.
The original basilica was built around the year 315 by Constantine, the first Christian Roman emperor.
Very different shape, but yeah, this is where it was, on this hill, and it looks very similar, almost like a Catholic school in this version.
Constantine became a Christian after having a vision on his way to battle. He saw a cross in the sky with the words, "In hoc signo vinces." Under this sign, thou shalt conquer. Constantine triumphed and he converted, and in thanksgiving, he founded a basilica over the tomb of St. Peter. At the Vatican Hill, Roman Emperor Nero had built a circus. A Roman circus was a long stadium that was used mainly for chariot races, but it could also serve for gladiatorial combat and other important events. Countless Christians were killed in this place, and their bodies
Oh, it's like didn't know that, so there's deep meaning here of sacrifice.
were then buried in a necropolis that was
Martyrdom.
located north of the circus. It was there, the legends tell, that the body of St. Peter was brought after having been crucified near what is now the Church of San Pietro in Montorio. Old St. Peter's was a typical early Christian basilica, whose plan and elevation resembled those of Roman basilicas with aisles and naves, and it was about half the size of the current church. It used to have a courtyard with a fountain in the center, and a portico called a narthex, destined for those who weren't baptized, as they were not allowed inside the church. And the basilica had a Latin cross plan. St. Peter's tomb was placed in the center of the crossing, beneath the altar. In 1505, Julius II, a pope who wanted to leave a great legacy, made the daring and controversial decision to demolish the old St. Peter's completely and build a new basilica.
That's like heresy to some people. I bet you people were outraged for this, because nobody likes change.
By that time, Old St. Peter's was more than 1,000 years old, and it had been pillaged many times, so the church was falling into ruin.
It's a good excuse then.
Also, Julius II wanted a large basilica that could house the massive and magnificent tomb that Michelangelo was carving for him. The Pope commissioned Donato Bramante, one of the most talented architects of the time, to draw up plans for the new basilica. And Bramante had a difficult task, tearing down and reconstructing the most important church in Christendom. So of course certain things have to be conserved. Work on the new church began in 1506,
Swiss Guard.
the same year that another long-standing Vatican institution, the Swiss Guard, was founded. Since then, these guards, the uniforms of whom were designed by Michelangelo, are responsible for the Pope's security. Before his death in 1514, Bramante was able to complete the 4 central piers and the arches between them to support the dome. These are drawings by a Dutch artist who was in Rome at the time, called Martin van Heemskerk, showing you St. Peter's as designed by Bramante under construction. You see these big barrel vaults coming up with old St. Peter's still intact underneath. Over the next 40 years, several architects and popes had their own ideas that differed from Bramante's for how the church should look. And thanks to this endless debate, Rome got used to the unfinished church. So much so that Raphael used the domeless center of St. Peter's as the background for his most famous painting, a fresco he did in the Vatican apartments.
What? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. What? I just got chills. I love learning.
This is a classicist architecture of antiquity. This is the architecture of barrel vaults and articulated walls and carved niches. But it's more than that. It's also the architecture of the Renaissance, the architecture of St. Peter's as much as Bramante managed to build. And he's putting this cast of classical characters into that space. It's called School of Athens,
Yep.
which suggests that these are
Which is such a contrast too, right? And it's kind of like paying homage to the yesteryears of Rome. Obviously, a lot of people derive a mixture of Etruscan, Greek, Carthaginian aspects all into Rome. This is playing homage to Athens, which a lot of classical antiquity of education, the arts, democracy, and government, and rule of law, and everything else that you could litter inside of that fall from Athens. And this is Rome.
Are the great Greek philosophers. These are the great heroes of antiquity. These are the people that thought the thoughts and conceived the ideas that the entire Renaissance is aimed at recovering.
I need to just take time and understand every single one of these.
In center, you have Aristotle and Socrates.
Okay, is he literally going to go through all of these? That would be insane if he did. Well, okay, let's go back.
Renaissance is aimed at recovering. In center, you have Aristotle and Socrates having
Okay.
a discussion. Over here, you have Archimedes and Pythagoras, the great mathematicians.
Oh my gosh, one's copying his notes. That means the guy that's copying is the predecessor. I mean, sorry, the successor.
And here you have Heraclitus, who is just grumpy. He was a skeptic. There's not simply a matching of the architecture of contemporary Rome, the architecture of Bramante St. Peter's with the architecture of classical Greece, but also portraits of contemporary figures are encoded in the school of Athens. So you look at Socrates, and he's a portrait of Leonardo da Vinci, whom Raphael would have known quite well. And if you look down here, the grumpy, skeptical guy, Heraclitus, is a portrait of Michelangelo.
Yeah, I was about to say, that is Michelangelo.
And Euclid, the father of geometry, is Bramante. And Raphael also includes himself. With this painting, Raphael is saying, this is the school of Athens. These are the great thinkers of antiquity. And we are them again.
The Renaissance.
What's great about the plan of Bramante is its incredible delicacy, and this idea of the centralized plan becoming elaborated with multiple organizations. Unfortunately though, Bramante's design could not be executed because the structure was insufficient. Bramante had this idea that he would build a dome, somewhat like the dome of the Pantheon, and given his plan you simply cannot support a compression dome on piers, particularly not piers this delicate. The dome of the Pantheon is still standing after 2,000 years because of its massive thick wall supporting the whole thing.
Yeah, but you wouldn't have that same support there, is what we're saying.
So after Bramante died, other architects came in to do projects for St. Peter's. Believing that the new church should more closely approximate to the old St. Peter's, Raphael submitted to Pope Leo X a design that was in the shape of a Latin cross in 1514. But when he died in 1520, Baldassare Peruzzi took over and reverted to the Greek cross. In 1538, under Pope Paul III, Antonio da Sangallo submitted another version of the Latin cross plan, which is essentially a revision and expansion of Raphael's design. He even went so far as to construct an enormous wooden model of his design.
Dang.
But its scale was so big that there would be a great lack of light inside. So when Sangallo died in 1546, the Pope appointed the
That's crazy. That's crazy. Right here, by the way, so I'm going to show you my wealth of knowledge. This is actually in, obviously that's Michelangelo. This is Sistine Chapel, and this is on an Epcot ride in Disney World in Orlando, Florida.
Michelangelo to finish the church. Michelangelo returned to Bramante's design, adopting once again the Greek cross. But he simplified his predecessor's layout, creating a more organic flow that tied the corner chapels more closely to the larger church. And notice the amount of structure that Michelangelo puts in his plan compared to what Bramante had anticipated in his plan. He strengthened the church's central piers and its outer walls so that they could carry the building's massive weight, and he reduced the inner walls to allow more light, giving the immense interior a lighter feel and a greater sense of space. He designed a facade based on the Pantheon using 2 rows of massive columns, and he reimagined the dome. As a Florentine, Michelangelo knew that
Ooh, I see it. I see it. I see it. Obviously, this is Florence. This is I wouldn't say centerpiece, but the icon of Florence is right here. Yes.
dramatic silhouette of Brunelleschi's dome on top of the Church of Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence, and understood what a profound impact such a silhouette can have on a city's skyline.
Amazing.
The dome envisaged by Bramante is the series of stacked rings, and the dome envisaged by Michelangelo is much closer to the Florentine model by Brunelleschi, a double dome more ovoid in shape than round, which has the advantage of translating the loads more directly to the ground, and with ribs and a system of chains that were to go along on the inside, and further work and tension to counteract the lateral thrust. So Michelangelo raised what had been built of the dome and revised it. His version is taller, stronger, more vigorous, reaching toward heaven. Michelangelo died in 1564, and only the drum of the dome had been completed. But such was Michelangelo's reputation that Pope Pius V personally engaged Vignola, Michelangelo's assistant, to make sure that not a stone got...
Wow, look at this. That's crazy. Even to see like the countryside in the background is to know how diverse Rome was in terms of like the landscape and where it sat in medieval times. Well, I wouldn't even say this is medieval. This is Renaissance times, modern times.
changed from Michelangelo's plan. In 1585, Pope Sixtus V appointed architect Giacomo della Porta, assisted by Domenico Fontana, to complete the dome, and the dome was finished in 1590, as it is inscribed at the top of it.
Yeah.
In 1605, Pope Paul V demolished what remained of the old St. Peter's. And there are a couple of problems with Michelangelo's church by the time you get to the 1600s. Firstly, it doesn't quite cover all the holy ground that had been made sacred by the old St. Peter's. And secondly, the Counter-Reformation insisted upon a Latin cross layout for new churches, as the Greek cross plan disregarded the ceremonial and sacramental rituals that were a part of the church. So the Pope decides that work has to be changed and a nave has to be added, both to respect the desire for longitudinal churches and to cover up all these tombs and all this holy ground, and not let it be made profane by being cast outside of the walls of the church. Carlo Maderno is given the task, and in 1608, his work began by tearing down Michelangelo's still incomplete facade. Kind of a tragedy, because Michelangelo designed the enormous dome, surpassing almost everything that had been seen till then. Immediately upon entering, you would be under the immense cupola. Maderno added 3 bays in front and a great vestibule. The whole idea is destroyed. Nowadays, it's necessary to traverse a tunnel more than 90 meters long before arriving at the dome.
Almost like a train station, how this kind of feels, but in a respectable way, is what I'm trying to say. Everyone's just,
Michelangelo's church should have risen as a single mass. The eye would have taken it as one thing. Now the facade bears no relation to the dome. The dome has been hidden, as you cannot see it when you're in front of the building. Hagia Sophia at Constantinople is a triumph with half the superficial area of St. Peter's, because there is a direct relationship between the exterior of the building and the interior. Nevertheless, the architecture of St. Peter's adopted another concept that wasn't present in Michelangelo's plan, and that is procession. As the pilgrim emerged from the narrow and tangled streets of Rome, he would suddenly find himself in front of a new St. Peter's. From there, he would be drawn forward past the obelisk in the middle of the piazza, up to a flight of steps to a portico in front of a series of giant marble columns. And along its nave to the dramatic altar. On the frieze that's on top of the walls of the nave, you can see verses from the Bible that Jesus said to Peter inscribed in Latin. The altar stands over the remains of St. Peter and under Michelangelo's immense dome. When the Pope says Mass in St. Peter's Basilica, he is literally surrounded by this inscription on the base of the dome. Tu es Petrus et super hanc Petram aedificabo ecclesia meam, et dividabo claves regni caelorum.
yeah, same, bro.
Which translates to, you are Peter, and upon this stone I will build my church, and I will give you the keys to the kingdom of the heavens. These words proclaim the reason for the church's existence. The architectural character of the interior was largely carried out in the 17th century under Bernini, who succeeded Maderno as architect-in-chief in 1629. To reduce the scale of the vast space under Michelangelo's dome, Bernini designed the bronze baldacchino, a a symbolic protective canopy over the high altar above the tomb of St. Peter. To match the scale of the crossing, the baldacchino is more than 28 meters high. Its twisted columns are not a Baroque invention, but a greatly enlarged
That is so cool. I just realized the twisted column.
version of the marble columns that you see at the second floor level of the crossing piers. These used to stand before the altar of the old basilica.
Oh, wow.
It was believed that the original twisted columns were brought by Constantine from the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, so their continued use here links St. Peter's with the Holy Land.
That's interesting.
In the enormous space of the basilica, the baldacchino distinctly marks the spiritual center of the church, which would otherwise appear insignificant. So large is the interior that the baldacchino's height, equivalent to a 9-story building, is not overpowering from a distance. Beyond the baldacchino and framed on axis by its columns is Bernini's culminating work in the basilica, the Cathedra Petri, or Chair of Peter, an elaborate reliquary in bronze constructed around the supposed wooden seat of the first apostle. Lightly supported by 4 figures representing doctors of the church, those men who established the doctrine of the faith, the chair floats above the visitor's head against a glorious backdrop where golden rays emanate from a brightly illuminated stained glass center on which rises the dove of the Holy Spirit.
So much detail. Unbelievable. I mean, I would expect nothing less, but
The interior walls
I've never really looked into this interior either, so this is very new to me.
have one colossal order of Corinthian pilasters, crowned with semicircular burial vaults 46 meters high. The walls are faced with marble, producing a rich effect, and the dome is beautifully decorated in mosaic. Bernini was also responsible for the pavement, the decoration of the piers, and the design of 4 sculptural groupings for altars and tombs. The elongation of the nave under Maderno proceeded pretty quickly because he had more than 800 people simultaneously working on the basilica.
But it's an army working. I mean, think about nowadays. You have a similar workforce for like huge projects. So, but I'm sure these were very, very highly skilled individuals with different masonry workings and interior paint design and everything else. And they all had to be good at math.
By 1612, as it says in the inscription of the facade, he completed the elongation of the nave and the facade. You can see in this drawing what Maderno was thinking about when designing the facade. He's showing a relationship of the dome to the body of the church and 2 towers flanking it. But the drawing is highly idealized because the dome is way back here and the facade is way up here. There's no way anybody would be
It's about perspective.
able to see the dome from within the purview of the space immediately in front of St. Peter's. Also, the towers were not constructed before Maderno's death. So when Bernini attempted to build the towers, the whole facade began to come tumbling down.
So how long, I'm sure he'll tell me, how long did it take to build this from start to finish, from whenever they began to work on the drum of the dome to the finished product?
He had miscalculated the weight of the towers. Bernini was formed as a sculptor, not as an architect. An architect with more knowledge of building might have made sure that the foundations were fortified before trying to put extra weight on the system. So they had to stop the towers, and that's why when you look at St. Peter's, the proportions look kind of funny. It was meant to have towers that would give you a more ideal relationship of height to width. But now it just looks long and sprawling. In fact, here you can see that the rectangle desired by Maderno to be flanked by these towers would have been a golden rectangle, and there would have been another golden rectangle halfway through the towers, a perfect square unifying the top of the towers with the facade, and another square that unifies the whole composition with the dome. A very agreeable geometry, but instead it becomes something excessive. Maderno's strategy for the facade is to make the center more dense and more plastic, as well as to compress the columns toward the end of the temple figure, so that when you see an orthographic projection of the facade, the columns begin to reprise the rhythm you would get in an elevational drawing of a round thing. And in this case, it's Bramante's drawing of the Tempietto, one of the most influential buildings of the Renaissance. The basilica was finally consecrated in 1626, but you still need a courtyard. Old St. Peter's
Yeah, talk about a courtyard. Wait, we talking about a courtyard behind or in front?
had a courtyard, which was necessary for various rites and rituals. There might be blessings or special holidays when the Pope comes outside and greets the people. In the center of what is now the Piazza of St. Peter's is Sixtus V's contribution to the shaping of the space in the front of the basilica.
Okay, we're talking about the front.
The 25-meter-tall Vatican obelisk, which was installed there in 1586. This was the largest intact Egyptian obelisk moved to Rome during the Empire. How the ancient Romans transported them
A large ship.
is unknown, but the presence of
I mean, it's a big ship. I mean, they layered it down on a ship, and they escorted it to Rome, and then they used probably musk oxen or large cattle to sled it from wherever the dock was.
several broken ones indicates that their methods were not always successful. This obelisk was originally situated in the center of the Circus of Nero. The task of Domenico
Did it not move? Did it just stay there?
Fontana, Sixtus
Oh, it did move slightly.
V's architect, was to move it about 240 meters to its new location in the center of the piazza, all without damaging the shaft or its carvings. His solution to the problem involved encasing the obelisk in a protective timber framework, transferring it to a horizontal position by means of ropes and pulleys, which were controlled by the coordinated action of
Humans are just so amazing, man.
men and horses, and then moving it over rollers to the new site. As the obelisk was raised in front of St. Peter's, the entire College of Cardinals, along with the citizenry of Rome, turned out to watch the spectacle. Barricades kept the curious at a safe distance, and absolute silence was enforced during the critical lifting stages, so that the workmen could hear and respond correctly to
How heavy is it?
Fontana's signals, given by a trumpet and a bell. And they erected it almost in the right place. As you can see, it's almost exactly where you want it to be, but not quite. Following his successful removal of the Vatican obelisk, Fontana was commissioned to relocate 3 other obelisks in Rome. Those standing today in the Piazza del Popolo, at San Giovanni in Laterano, and at the apse of Santa Maria Maggiore were all positioned by Fontana. For the Piazza of St. Peter, Bernini puts an ingenious strategy into play. He makes the center of the courtyard not immediately adjacent to the church, but he uses the new location of the obelisk as the center of an ovalized space, far enough away from the church so that you can begin to get a glimpse of the dome. So even though you've been denied the view of the dome by the extension of the nave, he's going to put you far enough back to see the dome. So by displacing the center of the forecourt this far away, he's suddenly making it possible to read the dome and the facade together again. The edges of the trapezoidal space clip into the facade at the point that the towers of Maderno's original project would have been, and so emphasizing Maderno's facade. Here's the problem though. This is as far back as you could get and still look at the facade of St. Peter's, and you can just awkwardly see the top of the dome. And this masterful drum, this great plasticity of columns playing in this syncopated double rhythm, forget it. You need to be way across Rome to see it.
It basically shadows everything else around it because of its height. And by the way, Rome looked very different when this was created, so we have to think about that too.
It wasn't until Mussolini cut a road through Rome in the 20th century that St. Peter's was actually connected to the Sistine diagram of these wide long streets. And if you stand at the end of the street,
How do you what do you do when you look like what? Come on. This is a masterpiece right here.
then you'll be able to fully read the facade and the dome together, which is really what you want to do.
Amazing.
And if you observe the relationship of the Basilica with the Piazza, it's almost as if he flipped it, so that the spot where the obelisk is located, in a sense,
That's cool. That's cool.
mirrors the spot where the tomb of St. Peter is located underneath the dome. And this stair that's adjacent to the facade becomes like a joining piece between the church and the Piazza. And if you stand in these specific points, which are marked in the pavement, the rows of columns that make up the courtyard all line up, and you only see a single row of columns.
Dang. Dang. That's crazy.
But if you're walking through the space, it's like walking through a forest of columns.
Oh my. Yeah, we talked about the square in like in a different video, so go check that one out and like, but it's amazing.
Notice also how Bernini ends the space of the courtyard. He places the facade of a little Roman temple. This is one of the noblest entrance courtyards in Europe, a space that embraces the faithful. And this is a drawing made by Bernini, where he shows you that his concept for the colonnade
Oh, it's like to wrap your arms around you.
is to represent the welcoming maternal arms of the Holy Mother Church,
Wow.
as he once said.
If you want to better understand how St. Peter's Basilica is integrated into Rome's urban fabric, I recommend that you watch my video explaining the city of Rome.
Was a good one. Was a good one. So let's go back a little bit and like, we want to get to that image on the street that we were just in awe from. This one right here. Yeah. Just a marvel, a marvel, a marvel in this world of architecture, of religion, of Rome's yesteryears, kind of like exceeding to the 16th century. It's amazing. I'm speechless really when I watch some of these videos because it's just it's human achievement at its peak. Wow. Give me some context below if I missed anything. Thank you for being here. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye bye.